Keep loving even though people have despised you and pushed you away. Keep serving even when no one thinks that you're doing a good job and no one says thank you. Keep giving even if you feel like your giving is not producing anything. Keep growing even if you don't know the end, or even though you can't see the end in sight. Do not grow weary in doing good, because at the proper time, if you do not give up, you will reap a harvest. You will be victorious if you are willing to hold on. Brothers and sisters, let it be said of you that you have overcome. Morning, it's good to be with you. In a moment, we're gonna look at Genesis chapter 32. Today, our journey through the Old Testament is gonna continue through the life of Jacob. We have been talking about these characters for the last couple of months, the patriarchs of Genesis, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And for the majority of our series, We've actually been looking at these guys' lives and learning a lot about them, certainly, but also learning about ourselves. And really, we've had a keen eye as we've looked through these characters with this question has come to mind. What are the traits of the people God uses to bring about his promises? And that's really what we have been talking about. The promise that was given all the way back in Genesis chapter 12 to Abraham, that God would use him to bless the whole world. This is what it says. It basically says, I'm gonna bless you and you will become a blessing, and then everyone on the earth will be blessed through you. You will bless the whole world. And this has been the promise that we've been looking at since Genesis chapter 12, and then we've been looking specifically at these patriarchs and seeing what qualities do they have that allowed them to be such a great blessing. It might be cliche to say, but the objective of the people of God in some form or fashion could be distilled down to a task to make the world a better place while we await the recreation of the world. Now, the world has a lot of ideas as to how to make the world a better place. How do we bless the whole world? The world has lots of thoughts about how to do that. This week, I read a blog post that said 50 things to make the world a better place. Are you ready for some things? One, you can give up your seat on the bus. I don't know who anybody here rides a bus, but if you ride a bus, give up your seat, you'll make the world a better place. You could recycle. I was told that would make the world a better place. You could adopt a pet. And there was all these sort of list of things, 50 things that are cliche enough. Say a nice thing to someone once a day. Certainly you can do that, and that would make the world, I guess, a better place. But our objective is way, 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 way bigger than that. Our objective is way bigger than just adopting a pet, though that I'm sure that's a great thing. Our objective is literally to fix the spaces, our circles, our communities, our families, and bring them back into a state of living where there is freedom, where there is no guilt and no shame and no hatred and no bigotry. Our objective as followers of Jesus is so much bigger. Our objective is to help foster communities so rich in love and so rich in support that people taste heaven before they ever arrive there. When Abraham was told to bless the world, that's what he was told to do. Bring the Garden of Eden back into this miserable space. This is our objective, and it's massive. And I know that many of us are thinking, well, I'm not that awesome. Maybe that's what you're thinking. I'm not that awesome, and I don't know if I can really do that, but I can maybe make it a little bit more applicable to you. Maybe you can't make the whole world into heaven, but I bet you can make your family a little bit more like heaven. Or make your marriage feel a bit more like heaven, where there is no shame and no guilt and there is love and support. Or make your little community surrounding your family and your immediate family or your extended family, or how about your roommates or the floor of your apartment building or your places or your classmates. We all can build our little pods, our little groups into a place that touches or that looks and tastes and sounds a little bit more like heaven. And so when we read these words, when the promise comes to Abraham to bless the whole world, we have to realize that that promise has distilled all the way down to all of us here today. All of us can do a little bit of this through the Holy Spirit and through the wonderful message of Jesus' gospel. We can redeem our little communities into places that look like heaven while we await tasting heaven fully. And so that's been our objective, right? We've been looking closely at the qualities of God's people and the people he has chosen to bring about that promise. And all of these accounts happen well before there is a law or kind of a dictated way about how we should live, right or wrong. And what we have to do instead is look at story and look at narrative and look at these accounts, and we have to analyze what is it here that God wants from his people and what is it that he does not want from his people. With that in mind, our thought has been, again, circling this question. What about these men and women allowed them to be used by God to bless the whole world? And we've been looking closely at the stories, and in each of these accounts, we've gathered some qualities. We've looked at love, and we've talked about sacrifice and devotion and faith in God or trust in God's word. And here, once again, in our account this morning, we encounter a characteristic of men and women of the promise, a characteristic necessary to create our impact. Today, we're gonna look at Jacob at the climax of his life, and we're gonna see in him a trait necessary to bless the world. Today, we're gonna talk about perseverance, about the character of someone who is knocked down but gets back up again, about the character trait of someone who is strong amid adversity, and who has a bit of grit or stick-with-itness, and who wrestles to become the person God has called them to be. And we're gonna learn about this trait as we dive into the climax of Jacob's life in Genesis chapter 32, verse 22. This is where we're gonna be, but I wanna set up the background so that we're clear as we get to the story. We've been talking about Jacob's life for the last few weeks, but this is a quick reminder if you haven't been here. Jacob was born as the younger twin of his brother Esau. Esau is the older twin, Jacob is the younger twin. Esau, being the older son, was entitled to a double portion of his father's riches and also the blessing to become the new family patriarch. But in two moments, one of deception and one of opportunism, Jacob, who is the younger brother, steals Esau both his birthright and his blessing. He takes them both from him. So after stealing his birthright and his blessing with a little bit of a help from his mama, Esau is furious. Jacob has stolen it and Esau is mad, and Jacob, understanding that Esau wants to kill him, goes on the run. While he's on the run, he encounters God for the first time in a vision. Rocco Rodriguez did a sermon about this a couple of weeks ago. And there, Yahweh, the God of his father Isaac and Abraham, tells him that it will be through him, not through his brother Esau, but through him that he will bless the whole world. Just reminding him of the fact that he is the new one, who is the new patriarch, who will bring about the promises of God. And after that, Jacob is amazed, and so he gives a tenth to Yahweh, he worships him there, and there's a little problem, which is that he's still on the run. And so instead of going back home, he sets out for land of his father Abraham. He goes back to Laban, who is a relative of Sarah, and there he seeks a wife. While he's seeking a wife, he falls in love with a woman named Rachel, Laban's youngest daughter. And so Jacob makes an agreement that he will work for 7 years for the hand of his daughter, of Laban's daughter. And while he is betrothed to him and that betrothal period is over, Laban tricks Jacob, and instead of giving him Rachel, he gives him his daughter Leah. Jacob still loves Rachel deeply, and so decides to work 7 additional years for the hand of his other daughter, Rachel. So after about 20 painful years of labor for Laban, God has proven that Jacob will be blessed the way he said he would be. He leaves Laban's household rich. He'd acquired great wealth. He has 12 sons and a daughter, and now it's time for him to return home to the land of his father, the land of Canaan, and continue this idea of blessing the world. But there is still one major issue. Esau is still there. And he gets word that Esau is not just waiting for him, but he's coming to him with 200 men. Jacob doesn't know what Esau wants. He imagines that Esau wants to kill him, maybe rightly so. And so he devises a plan. Jacob sends messengers to Esau, and then he sends caravans in droves to Esau, filled with stuff and gifts and servants and waves. And lastly, he sends over the entirety of his family. And what he hopes is that Esau will accept these gifts and so then receive Jacob. And this is where our story picks up in Genesis chapter 32, verse 22. Are you with me this morning? All right. That night, everything happens in this story at night, pitch black. Jacob got up and took his wife, 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jacob. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions, so Jacob was left alone. Jacob has been, for the last 5 chapters, for the last 20 plus years, a weary, burdened, threatened character. He has been being deceived and deceiving others for the entirety that we have known him. And so his life has not been easy. And here we have him left alone in the middle of the dark, in the middle of the Middle Eastern wilderness. It's a little bit of a sketchy place. You can imagine Jacob has already sent his family over and he's hanging out there, just maybe pondering what will happen. Will Esau receive me? Will he not receive me? What's going to go on with my life? And then all of a sudden, the next verse in the Bible is, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. Jacob's just walking around the wilderness, and then he is tackled by a random guy. He's held tightly, and he keeps wrestling with him until daybreak. Alone in the dark, in the wilderness, suddenly Jacob is locked in a wrestling match. The assailant here is labeled as only a man. But later in the chapter, Jacob will identify this man as God. And in the only other verse in the Bible that references this story, Hosea chapter 12, this character is called the angel of the Lord, which is a title used to identify the Old Testament sightings of God as man. We'll talk about that in a future sermon. But for now, just bring it in your mind. Jacob is alone in the dark, in the wilderness, and God is wrestling him. Next verse. When the man saw that he could not overpower him. What is the goal? Maybe to take him to the ground. Maybe the goal is to have him cry, uncle. I don't know what the goal is. There is some sort of goal here for the man, and he's wrestling with him and holding him, but for whatever reason, Jacob stands firm. We know Jacob is quite strong. In Genesis chapter 29, verse 10, he rolled that stone away that no one else could roll away. So he's a strong man, he's a mighty man. So the guy's wrestling with him, and he doesn't want to lose. This God man doesn't want to lose, and so in order to make sure he doesn't lose the battle, it says that he strikes Jacob's hip. It says he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. He's wrestling, and then Jacob, he gets just touched, and all of a sudden he needs a double hip replacement. If you've gotten that, God bless you. Oh no, and he can't move. He's like, oh, this is too much. We never see the intentions, as I mentioned, of the wrestling match. There's other times where God comes in and says, I'm going to kill that guy. Exodus chapter 4, he's about to kill Moses. It says he sought to kill Moses. But here it doesn't appear that doesn't appear to be the goal of God. And instead, it's simply to wrestle with Jacob. But Jacob is strong, and God touches his hip, and it's dislocated, it's destroyed, it's injured. And even with the injury, Jacob does not give up. At that point, I'd be done. Hey, the man shattered my hip by just touching it. I'm good, dude. What else could he do to me? But Jacob has this perseverance, this stick-with-itness. So the man said, this is God saying, let me go, for it is daybreak. Maybe it's sun coming up and God doesn't want him to know who he's fighting with. Maybe he knows that if he sees God in the day that he will die. But we don't know why, but that's what he asks. And Jacob replies, I will not let you go until you bless me. Jacob, the model of physical tenacity, he refuses to let go despite having been injured. And he asks the man to bless him. Why? Well, it's likely that in this miraculous touch of his hip, Jacob comes to the realization that this guy is no mere man. Instead, he's someone greater, and so he requests a blessing. In the Old Testament, the inferior would request a blessing from the superior. And so he's making acknowledgement that this guy is more important than I am, he's greater than I am, and so hey, I want him to bless me. I will not let go until you bless me. Then the man asked, what is your name? Jacob, he answered. I am Jacob. We've looked at this name before, but what does Jacob mean? It means deceiver, yes, supplanter. It means grasper. I read a commentary that's described it as having a chip on his shoulder. For the entirety of his life, he's been just longing to be something he could never quite be. And he's encountered lots of men who would undermine him, and he's undermined lots of men, and he's been fighting for something that he never has quite received. And sharing his name, Jacob is doing more than just giving information. He is confessing the appropriateness of his name. This is who I am. I am somebody that isn't quite there. Then the man said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. A new name is a pretty important theme in the Old Testament. We've seen it already with Abraham and Sarah. When characters hit their climax, the climax of their story, we have seen God swoop in to say, hey, you're not who you once were. Instead, this is who you will be. And so what does this story mean for Jacob? What does this story mean? It means that he won't be the one that strives for more. Instead, it has been declared to him by God Almighty that though he has struggled and failed and tried and attempted and been pushed to the edge of his life, he has not been overcome. You were not overcome. You will be known as a man who could not be overcome when life's troubles come. And another way to say the same thing is you have the perseverance that when you are knocked down, you get back up again. The reason for this name is clear because the whole story he has been wrestling. Since we met him, he has been wrestling. He's been wrestling with his brother and been wrestling with Laban and has been wrestling here with God. And so after this, Jacob is like, hey, please tell me your name. You might recall Moses. What is your name? But he replied, why do you ask my name? Then he blessed him there. In other words, I'm not telling you my name. You already know who I am. And he blessed him right there. Does he whisper in his ear and say, look, as I told you before, you will be the father of many nations and the whole world will be blessed through you. Does he remind him of the person he will become and the community that he will become? He blesses him there, and then the next line says, verse 30, so Jacob called that place Peniel, saying, it is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. I have a double hip replacement, but it could have been worse. I love the next line. The sun rose above him, and as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. As Jacob departs, he departs with two things. He leaves with a new name and with a new limp. The new name will remind him of his destiny, and the limp will remind him of his struggle. That's the story. Isn't it profound? It's rich, it's beautiful, and it brings us to the idea, like, what do we then take from it? What is the character? We've been asking, what is the character of the man that God uses to bring a blessing to the world? Well, I'll say it this way. It's a man who is willing to wrestle with God, to wrestle with men, to certainly wrestle with themselves and with their own flesh, and who God will say to them, you have overcome. And as I say this, and as I think about this, and as I think about our community and the world in which we live in, there is another truth that also hits me. See, I have seen, and you have seen it too, in the world in which we live, I have seen a move away from this grit and strength and a move towards weakness. Maybe a better word is not weakness, maybe a better word is fickleness. Fickleness is like this easiness to change your loyalties, a lack of grit, a lack of standing for something, a lack of standing up for what is right. And what I see is an attempt in our world to make things easier to not follow through. A push towards applauding those who have no discipline. A push towards praising those who are willing to quit. A push towards applause for those who have decided to push out, to end their marriage because it was a little hard. And this is the world that we're living in today. Marriages end so easily, and friendships end easily, and people quit after a week of going to the gym. You know why Planet Fitness says you'll get a discount if you pay for the whole year? It's because they don't expect you to come. They think you're gonna start and then you're gonna quit. And you know what? They are probably right. Because today, this is what happens. People make claims that they will do something and then they don't follow through. They don't have the perseverance to stick with a church, to stick with a marriage, to stick with a friendship, to stick with a friend group. They don't have the stick with itness to overcome obstacles and decide to push through because they believe on the other side blessings will come. I've learned this, and I hope you learn this too, that perseverance and struggling to overcome is a necessary quality if you want to make your little circle into a piece of heaven. And here's what I've learned also. You want to be blessed by God, and you want to be a blessing. Here's what you're going to have to learn. Everyone will walk into glory with a limp. Everyone who gets to glory will get there with some pain and some sorrow and some heartaches and some challenges. Everyone will lose some battles. There will be struggles between you and God, between you and your wife, between you and your best friends, between you and your roommate, between you and your children. There will be times where you have to get on your knees and beg God to just relieve some of the pain because it's too much. There will be times where it feels like God is pushing too hard against you. And it feels like giving in is a better option than continuing to stand firm. But let me say, those who are blessed are those who hold on and hold out until they receive the promise of God's blessing. And this is what I've learned. The only way to get glory is to be willing to have your hip broken. Maybe better than that, your heart broken. A lot of us are tempted with this. We hold on for a period of time, and then the times of testing come. The thorns of the parable of the sower come, and they choke us. And we're worried and we're afraid, and so we quit. And we quit because we aren't willing to have our flesh hurt, even if it means that little bit of flesh being hurt brings us into glory. We're short-sighted. We've lost track of what really matters. And here's again the idea that if you're going to have impact on the world, you're gonna have to learn to keep loving and keep serving. Keep loving even though people have despised you and pushed you away. Keep serving even when no one thinks that you're doing a good job and no one says thank you. Keep giving even if you feel like your giving is not producing anything. Keep growing even if you don't know the end, or even though you can't see the end in sight. Do not grow weary in doing good, because at the proper time, if you do not give up, you'll reap a harvest. You will be victorious if you are willing to hold on. Brothers and sisters, let it be said of you that you have overcome. Let it be said of you that the storm beat against your house. Let it be said of you that the struggles you faced were more than anyone could have faced. Let it be said of you that the fear you had was heavy and the temptations seemed harsh and everything, and there was injustice and wrongdoing and the injuries were great. But let it be said of you at the end of your life that you were an overcomer. That you stayed in, you held tight, you kept the faith, you finished the race, and you have received the crown of glory. And yes, I want you to know you will have heartache. I promise you. What did you come to church and learn today? The person preaching said, I will have heartache. I'm very encouraged by that. Well, you should be, because everyone has heartache. Everyone has struggles. Everyone's life is touched by something difficult. But it's your character in those moments that'll determine whether or not you'll be used by God, or whether or not you'll just be like, sorry to say, everyone else. This is why when God calls the prophets, he calls them with such intensity. This is what he says to Jeremiah: get yourself ready. Come on. Stand up and say to them whatever I command you. Do not be terrified by them, or I will terrify you before them. Today, I have made you a fortified city, an iron pillar and a bronze wall to stand against the whole land, against the kings of Judah, its officials, its priests, and the people of the land. They will fight against you. You ever feel like people are fighting against you? They will fight against you, but will not overcome you, for I am with you and will rescue you, declares the Lord. Be an overcomer. It's the characteristic of what's required for those who want to have an impact in God's church. Be an overcomer. James chapter 1 verse 12. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trials. For when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, therefore, my dear brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. And then here is the character of Christ himself. I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have tribulation, you will have hardship. But take heart, I have overcome the world. This is the character of what's required to have impact on the world. You have to have some grit. You have to have some stick-with-itness. You have to have some perseverance. You have to be willing to continue to stand up after you've fallen, after you've been punched and your hips are dislocated. You have to decide to get up again after people hurt you, after the church wrongs you, after your spouse says mean things about you, after there's been heartache and difficulty in your family. You have to have some strength to stand up again. And if you do, and if you hold out, at the end of time, you will be blessed because of your perseverance. Now, as I'm thinking about all of us here, I'm thinking that there are likely some of us who the question is not how to continue to persevere. The question is how to get it back because we've already given up. I think what Steve said is just so poignant. And maybe you're thinking that I've lost my first love. I've already been overcome by my struggle. And here's my thoughts for you. And they come from the only reference in the Bible to Genesis chapter 32. They come from Hosea chapter 12. It says this: the Lord has a charge to bring against Judah. Judah is the southern tribes, and this whole time of Hosea, God is just talking about how devastatingly terrible these people have been towards God. And he's using Hosea to talk about the fact that they have so easily forgotten the one they're supposed to love. He will punish Jacob now being the community, not just the individual, according to his ways, and repay him according to his deeds. In the womb, he grasped his brother's heel. As a man, he struggled with God. He struggled with the angel and overcame him. He wept and begged for his favor. He found him at Bethel and talked with him there. The Lord Almighty, the Lord is his name. But you must return to your God. Maintain love and justice and wait for your God always. Hosea is invoking Jacob's story, reminding them of their history, that they were not always the righteous people, that they are like their father Jacob, who has gone wayward, who failed many times, who was a deceiver and was somebody that continued to live with a chip on their shoulder, who did forget the promises of God. And then he's calling them to emulate Jacob's turning point, when he decided to cling to God. To cling to God, he wept and sought God's favor. That was his repentance. The reminder here is that God was with Jacob because he was willing to hold on tightly. And so let me just tell you, brothers and sisters, if you have gone away, you can come back. You can hold God tightly again. You can hold on and weep, but let me just say to you, when you come back and hold tight, don't think it's gonna be blue skies and rainbows and sunbeams from heaven. It will be a war, because stuff in you will have to be purged from you. God will edit you and correct you and stick you into the fire of his redeeming love, but you can come back. There's a story that I read this a couple of months ago that I found very inspirational that I want to share with you. This is a picture of a man named Audie Murphy. Audie Murphy is the most decorated soldier in United States history. Audie Monday was 17 when Pearl Harbor, the events of Pearl Harbor happened, and he couldn't enlist in the armed forces, but he wanted to, and so don't do this, but he forged some documents in order to become someone that can go into the military. But at the time, he was 110 pounds and 5'5". He was a little fella. This little fella wanted to do it, and so the Marines wouldn't take him, the Air Force wouldn't take him, the Navy wouldn't take him, but the Army was running low on cadets or low on enlisted soldiers, and so decided to take Audie. And Audie, Mr. Murphy, went into war. And he went into war, and his very first deployment in World War II, he was shot at. It hit his hip and his leg, and so he was supposed to be discharged because he was injured. But he pretended that he hadn't been shot and decided to forge some more documents and enlist again. He went back to war. And while he was in war, he received another injury. And he actually received a Purple Heart for that. And they asked him to get off the battlefield, but when the troops were low, he decided to sneak into a platoon, and he fought one more time. And in that third time, he was wounded again. And so what happened is that he received 3 Purple Hearts for 3 separate injuries. And after each subsequent injury, he decided to enlist again. His story is famous for resilience and for bravery. He is a legend in the armed forces, but I think his story speaks a little bit about our Christianity. And it highlights something, a mindset of loyalty and grit and unwillingness to let injuries define your future. And unwillingness to allow that church hurt or that whatever issue to define where you are spiritually. And I want to encourage you, if someone can do this for their country and patriotism, you certainly, as a disciple of Jesus Christ, should be able to do this for the Lord. You should be willing to be injured for God. That means you study the Bible with somebody, you help them, and then they abandon the faith. You don't go, I'm never doing it again. Instead, you say, sign me up. I'm going back to war. It may mean that, people hurt you in the church, and instead of running away, you say, what does Matthew chapter 18 say? I'm gonna go show them their faults, and if they don't listen, I'm gonna bring some more people, and I'm gonna do the work of reconciliation because this community means more to me than anything else. It means you have the resilience to be someone that even though they walk around with a limp, they will enter glory. Look, your story and my story is complicated. We got all sorts of things, but I promise you, if you endure at the end of your life, you will be able to see God face to face. When dawn comes, if you're willing to hold out until morning, you will see the sun rise again. And I believe God will give you a new destiny and a new name and will receive you into glory because you were a man or a woman who decided to not give up. Amen?